Okay. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to a wonderful Wednesday webinar where our guest this week is Claire O'Neill, who's an incredible organizer. She's been working on something called A Greener Future for a long time, and we recently went to the Green Events and Innovation Conference, which was packed with all sorts of amazing groups who were putting on green events and festival events and stadium events and venue events and festival events, and it was talking about how we get them greener and more sustainable. So, over to you, Claire. Tell us a little bit more how you got into this and about the a greener future and the conference. Over.
Yeah, so thank you so much for inviting me, and it's a real pleasure to be. I heard some introductions of the people on the call here, and it's great to be in such good company. So as you mentioned, I started A Greener Future along with some friends and even my lecturer from uni, which I get into 20 years ago. And originally it was called A Greener Festival. So at the time, this was in I suppose, around about 2004. I was doing a music industry management degree, but also I'd been getting really into the free party scene out in the woods in the UK. And when I went from, I grew up between Wolverhampton and Dudley in like quite a built up place. And then when I went to these outdoor events, I was discovering different people with different ways of thinking and different ways of living. So already there were people on the road with solar panels, like the Green Road Show, for example. And at those events, the essentially illegal events that weren't permitted, there were people sorting out the composting and having organic and vegan food. And there was a real sense of community and care and looking after each other and looking after the space where we were. And for me, that was so inspiring in like my late teens. But then conversely, I'd gone to work through my music industry management degree in major festivals where it was all big diesel generators, burger vans, like not really a sense of community, more a sense of commerce. And I thought, how can we take these things that are kind of a countercultural hippie ideal and bring it into the mainstream? And so another element of that was that I felt when I'd been into really open and inclusive community-based festival environments, I'd been more connected to the fact that I was part of the planet. And especially being under the elements, and anyone who remembers festivals from the past, where
Yeah.
it was very easy to get stuck in the mud or the water stops working or everything goes wrong with the toilets. So you get a real sense of the importance of electricity, the importance of shelter, of access to food, of clean water, which most people living in towns wouldn't really be exposed to in our country, certainly, and in many countries around the world. We're just so sheltered from
Mm.
the realities of those things. And so this was a massive inspiration to me. And I just dedicated my dissertation to festivals and the environment in 2005. And luckily, my lecturer at the time was the lawyer for Glastonbury, and also the legal counsel for a European festival association called Europe.
Wow.
So when I'd finished my dissertation, he was like, "What are you going to do with this?" It was asking, should UK music festivals be environmentally friendly? And
Wow. Brilliant. Hmm.
so my intention was, okay, I've finished my dissertation now. I'm going to go and do the next thing. But he encouraged me to then turn it into a website that my classmate Luke Westbury knew at the time how to make websites. And so a Greener Festival was started. And as soon as we put the research online, festivals all over the world started to get in touch. And they were either saying, we really want to learn more, we want to do more, or they were saying, this is completely what we do already. We're an eco festival in Australia or in California or wherever it might be. And we want to kind of make a community. So that was where it began, the kind of seeds of it. And then over the coming years, so much happened, obviously, between then and now, but a few real milestones where I think it was around about 10 years later. So we'd started doing this certification for events as a way of assessing what do you do with your power, your waste, your transport, your water, your food, communication. At one point, we added a section called calculating your carbon footprint, which at the time most people didn't know what that was. And and local ecosystems and local community. So we built a framework around each of these areas and assessed people to it. And as part of those assessments, we then gave feedback and shared learning between all of these festivals, which spread really quickly from massive festivals to small festivals. Um,
Wow, that's incredible work. Really, you've created a framework for them all to measure their impact and
Yeah,
spread.
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it was
wow,
something, it
amazing.
was real shared learning as well. Because
Mhm.
like I say, all of these amazing festivals got in touch. And also, I mentioned prior to this call starting about my friend Eileen McNamara at the time, who'd done
Eileen.
environmental science as her PhD. And so we were connecting different scientists as well as seeing what was happening on the ground, taking experience from the real do-it-yourself culture of the free party scene, and then connecting with the likes of Live Nation, who at the time were buying all of the festivals in the UK,
Mm.
so and elsewhere. Bearing in mind this was 20 years ago, like just before iPhones came out. So, but in 2015, we found that this kind of small group of really keen, young, volunteer-led people, our assessments were starting to be used for license hearings or tender applications and much more serious stuff. And so we thought, okay, we really need to professionalize this. So we started to do a training scheme for all of the assessors worldwide, which also meant that from the worldwide reach of the certification, we didn't have to travel. So we could have people in each country or even in each town where we do a lot of events that could do those assessments themselves. So this is something that still exists today. We do the sustainable event management training that anybody can do for venues or events. And then they can go on to do the assessor training and become assessors that go into the events. Um,
Wow.
Following on from that, sorry, I'll keep on going. So do just stop me if you need to add
Yeah,
some
no, no, it's cool. It's cool. We get the layout of it, and I've got a few
context.
questions to ask you as well. But this is
Cool.
pioneering work, and you're now making it mainstream. So that's
Yeah, I
incredible.
mean, that was one of the things that was super interesting. So next, after 2015, I almost stopped doing it because I thought, well, the awareness is kind of raised now. And I thought maybe we've come as far as we need to with what we were doing. And someone actually wrote their masters about AGF at that point and submitted it to us. And I was
Oh,
blown over. I was like, what? Like this thing that we've made up. But what they highlighted was that we were actually going into the events and looking at what was happening on the ground and really working with the organisers, which was quite different to more hands-off kind of consultancy, as you call it at the time. But then we found a really interesting phenomenon that even if a festival was really into its sustainability, should we say policies,
mm,
apart from the classics that we were really inspired by from the beginning, like Big Green Gathering, or the Green
mm.
Futures at Glastonbury, Kingston Green Fair at the time was a real inspiration as well.
A big green gathering, big inspiration to all of us. I remember going to the first one. We've actually got Alero's beamed in here, who's works with Shane, and
Mm,
they've been absolutely pioneering green festivals from the
absolutely.
very first day. Big respect to the Green Gathering, massive.
Yeah, big up the Green Gathering. And so aside from those forerunners and real pioneers and people that are uncompromising in their values, we found that a lot of the festivals, when you got to the main stage or the headline artists, it kind of stopped there and it was like, no, you're not allowed to touch this holy grail. And so we thought, well, how about if we speak to the agents and the artists instead, or as well, I should say, and get them pushing from the same direction.
Mm.
So we made a green rider, which I'd actually started when I was an aerialist with Arcadia and I was traveling the world at the time, which wasn't my most sustainable job ever, but it was the best job ever.
Epic, epic. I mean, working in
So good,
Arcadia as an aerialist, I mean, you
yeah.
can't really get higher in the festival culture, literally.
Yeah, it was
Doing
quite
aerial with
high.
Arcadia, it's like,
But
incredible.
from that, I'd like been able to see what happens on the road as well. So when there's big
Mm.
productions incoming to events, like if an artist is on the road, you kind of know what's happening behind the scenes with that and what those
Yeah.
relationships are.
Uh,
So we go on.
Well, just the amount that these festivals and big operations bring in. I know from what Linda's saying, the big production tours that go on. So you really look at everything with a greener future, and how much the impact is. I know there was, and we're going to come to a grid fairies question in a bit. But while we're on Arcadia, one of the things that this I think a couple of years ago at Glastonbury, you were working with grid fairies, and you whereas they have big diesel trucks or something or diesel generators to run things, you had grid fairies. If you tell people a little bit about that and when the
Yeah,
time's right
sure.
about the kind of solar generators, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to wrap up on the
Yeah, yeah,
AGF very shortly, so it went on essentially to have green artist riders, suppliers, venues, greener arena. So every part of the event ecosystem is all singing from the same hymn sheet and can push in the same direction. And that's been a big step change, but there's still loads of work to be done. But with Arcadia, so first, one of the best things with Arcadia, from my perspective, is they take military hardware and equipment of oppression and then turn it into something that's for unity and celebration. So you may have seen the spider stage at Glastonbury, for instance. It had customs and excise scanning units were like the bottom legs, and then it had log grabbers as its top legs, Nimbus biplane jet engines as its eyes on each side, and they go into these scrapyards like aeroplane graveyards. Who knew that was a thing? But it is.
yeah.
And they'd bring all these pieces out in order to create these places where people could have a great time.
That's a brilliant transformation. I mean, the Mutoid Waste slot and Arcadia are linked, and Mutoid Waste went to a big site in Berlin, and they put like tank henge together and put two armored personnel carriers on top of each other like a henge, and they had like MiGs diving into the ground, but and then a
Yeah,
big party around it.
exactly.
But it changed that war machine energy into something for peace and
Something for
meaning and partying together,
positivity.
and positivity.
Yeah. I'll share with you a picture if I can. It might
Mm.
work, it might not. Let's hope it will. Nay, share. I might be able to
Yeah, so
see
yeah, on
that.
greener features, yeah, just some of who you work with and what the progress has been made on greener events
Yeah.
as part of that. Oh
But
wow.
can you see that there, that
Yep.
crazy bug?
Yep.
So this is the latest Arcadia stage, and again, I don't know if you can see that's a dragonfly, but the body of it has been made from another war aircraft. I don't know what they're all called, but this was an aircraft used for
Might
war,
be
I
a
think.
Sea King helicopter, I think that one.
There we go. You know more than I do about that. So again, they've created a stage, and because they also didn't want to be touring so much with so much heavy equipment. When we used to do the Arcadia shows, the biggest shows would be 5 shipping containers and 55 crew, which is unsustainable on every level. So they wanted to do more stuff locally with local groups, and then have more kind of residency places in a way. But you should have Arcadia on and they can speak to you about that another time.
Yeah.
But you
Okay.
mentioned here about the energy. So this was, when was this now? This was 2 years ago, I believe. And it was the first time that we brought out the Grid Fairies battery to power the stage, which was charged by green energy, by ecotricity. And it was a real risk because normally all of these stages get charged by generator, which has HVO, a type of renewable diesel, but diesel nonetheless. And so there's not a grid connection near here. And so we thought, how can we do an alternative way of powering this stage without burning diesel? So the battery was able to power the stage, and it hardly needed any recharging at all. So we were able to bring that battery onto site to avoid a huge amount, like thousands of liters of diesel as a result. But it was really like quite scary at first because people are used to using what they're used to using, and no one wants to take the risk on their own show. I'll just go into grid fairies a bit more actually related to that to give you an idea of the scale. So we also worked with Massive Attack with this battery, and they were the first ones that ever allowed their main stage to be powered by 100% battery and green energy without any kind of diesel backup at all. And on the site that show happened, there wasn't a grid connection either, so we were fully dependent on the battery technology. Um,
That was massive. How many people came to that one? It was like
that one was
20,000.
35,000, I think. I think that, oh, was it 35,000? It might have been more than that. It was at
It
least 35,000.
shows
And
what's
then,
possible, folks. We don't need to be running it all on diesel. That's
yeah,
35,000 people powered by solar and grid fairies. Brilliant.
I mean, this is obviously, these are big scale events, but what's been really great about this, when we did this show, First, it was people being willing to not stick to business as usual and to do things differently on a big scale. So you can make a massive difference. But also, when you think about how many people watched this show, so what we try to do with the battery is make further change. So on this show, for example, it was not only 100% powered by renewable energy and the batteries, but also was 100% plant-based, totally vegan for all of the audience and also all of the crew and all of the artists as well, which for me was just fantastic. So another real benefit with this is if you've ever been to a festival or event where the generators are burning away, um, there's a real smell and a real noise that goes with that. And a lot of people have been camped next to them as well. It like drives you crazy. It's really bad for your health. Whereas these are completely silent and there's no emissions coming from tailpipes on the machine itself. So it is a real advantage. You still need to truck them, but you don't need to refuel them. And the batteries are modular, so they last a very long time, but then they can be replaced and reused. And that's one of the big differences with compared with fuel, which is a single use. The battery is reusable, whereas the fuel gets used once and it's burned and you have to replace it again.
Hmm.
So that was I mean, it's been a really exciting journey for the communications as much as the hundreds of thousands of litres of diesel that we're able to stop. And there's others who are doing, fantastic work in this area as well. This was at Lido in London last year. So again, it was starting to go just more mainstream. Like I was saying before, taking things that are quite alternative and Arcadia, yes, it's at Glastonbury, but they're quite out there and radical. And then this is an AG Presents event in the middle of London, and they were willing to do that as well because it had been proven at this point. So we're seeing more and more people willing to take the risks. That's us with just a picture of the innards of the battery.
Brilliant.
Um, so it's been really exciting in that respect with the developments and things that are available now, but also more than that, the willingness of people to take risks. And once Massive Attack used that battery, then we had all of the other artists and their agents saying, "Oh, we want to go to the festivals that are using alternative technologies or who aren't burning diesel because they've seen that
Mm.
it's possible."
Brilliant.
And then that can start to influence their audiences who come. Because if you can say from the main stage, we're not burning any diesel, as Dale said at this one, no animals were harmed in the making of this festival, it really helps spread the message essentially of the changes we need to see.
Absolutely. If people can see, I think what we called in the old solutions exhibition, practical working examples, people can see a gig as big as that pioneering, renewable energy and that it is possible and that's really important work, very phenomenal. So a greener future. You tell us a little bit more about who they work with and what progress you feel has been made towards kind of greener events and things because you must have seen it change over the decades, having an influence.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's quite amazing. I'm sure many people on this call will feel the same. Some things have changed, and some things you're like, "Oh my God, are we still having this conversation after
Mm.
all this time?"
My
So
God, yes.
there's always been like real forerunners. Like I said before, there's also Boom Festival in Portugal, and then more recent years, I think in the last decade, there's a festival called Digital DGTL in Amsterdam that does really remarkable work as well. I'd say that things that have changed or things that have become normal are things like reusable cup systems are very normal and commonplace now. This last 2 years, we've started to see 75 to up to 90% recycling rates, which we'd never seen before until these recent years. And that's partly because of things like compacting machines that work on site so that you can segregate and compact the different waste streams, as well as reducing the amount of waste that's coming onto site in the first place because of reusables. We're seeing a lot more openness and discussion of plant-based food, and that one is really important because when we've done the well, for many obvious reasons, but when we've done the assessments of the CO2 impacts, for example, previously it was thought that audience travel was, say, 80 to 90% of emissions of most festivals. But when the food is taken into account, the food can be up to 40% on its own because of the land use impacts, the water, and the production, essentially. And
Is there a kind of top three in ranking, like food is top, transport is second, and what's the third one? Or waste, rubbish?
yeah, transport, food, and the third one would probably be waste, but if you took into account materials, so the
Hmm.
procured materials like things like timber or any other purchased materials, that would probably be third. But the calculations on that are quite limited, and the recording of what comes in isn't that great as well. But
Hmm.
travel and food are really the two biggest ones from a global impact,
Hmm.
the impact of the whole supply chain. Obviously, something like power is direct. So for those who are into their CO2, your scope one is like your direct burning of fuel, essentially. That's your biggest emissions. Scope two is emissions from electricity on the grid. And then scope three is kind of everything else. So the fuel that gets used or not on site is a really significant source of or activity that's under the control of an event. I'd say I would argue that food is as well, because the promoters generally decide or the organizers decide what kind of food is offered at the event.
Hmm.
Whereas the travel, it depends on many other people's decision making and it depends on infrastructure beyond your event as well.
Hmm.
Um, and that's where I think we've seen another thing that's changed in recent years is there's a lot more collaboration with cities. We had with Act 1.5, who came out of Massive Attack's tenacity for how to make the industry more sustainable. They started alongside various partners. They instigated the creation of the UN Accelerator City, which is kind of like, when you get the European Green City and things like that. The UN Accelerator City is essentially a way of instigating action in TV, film, and events, creative events, to accelerate climate change, but from a city's perspective. So that might be, for instance, getting feeder pillars or getting grid connections onto event sites in a city, or improving the infrastructure and the timing for public transport around events, things like this. So it's getting the city involved in making events greener, but also seeing how the events as kind of living labs in some respects can inform the cities as well, and also help with the messaging and the communication through their platforms that they have.
That's
Um,
incredible. Incredible work to see it link, to jump, to evolve from, green events and festivals and to the back to cities and how we can put that into mainstream city design
yeah,
and life. That's
I mean
really,
it's
really important.
hugely important because there was a moment when it was we were looking at licensing requirements for events to meet certain sustainability standards, which I think would be great and really important, and there is work towards that. But there's only so far that an event can go because they don't operate in a vacuum. So if your event is happening in a place where there's no access to renewable energy, where there's no public transport network, where the country subsidizes industrial animal agriculture and doesn't support the opposite. There has to be a joined up approach because the events can't just miraculously suddenly be a haven of perfection.
Mm.
Some of them probably are, but it's really difficult, and most won't if it goes against what the facilities are.
Mm.
And I think that there's something so important now, especially with the rise of imperialism and populism, and divisiveness, that the platforms that events have, especially in like music and sport and others, it's been really
Mm.
important to get the house in order as much as we can, but also now that platform to speak. Especially when it's that one of the few places that people are coming together as groups, large groups with young people usually, in order to give messages that they
Yeah.
probably won't see through algorithms on social media when they've got their phones in their hands all
I
the
think that's a
time.
really, really important point. One of when the Green New Deal Rising guy did their webinar, they said young people, particularly when they have their big strategy sessions, to leave their phones behind and meet face to face. But music has so much influence on culture, and one of the favorite sayings recently is culture eats strategy for breakfast. Remember Rock Against Racism in the, 70s, 80s, made it popular for more people to be anti-racist. And music drives culture, and the more we can get big artists speaking up about these things, it really shifts things. So are there any particular artists that are paving the way that you feel on things at the moment?
Yeah, I've already mentioned Massive Attack quite a few times because they're doing so much
Yeah,
great stuff.
good.
Obviously, everybody's heard about Coldplay doing stuff ever since Chris Martin accidentally said in an interview that they wouldn't tour again until it was green, and then he was like, "Oh, I just thought it sounded good, and now we have to do it." So,
Mm,
but that was actually a really good instigation because when an artist like Chris Martin or a festival like Glastonbury says, "This is how it's going to be now," it causes a huge amount of activity in the industry, if you call it that, or with the suppliers around them. Because then people think, okay, if I'm gonna supply your lighting, then how am I gonna make this sustainable so that I'll get chosen for your tour, for instance.
mm.
Does have a great impact. The likes of Billie Eilish, who goes 100% plant-based and is really supportive of lots of humanitarian causes. Sam Fender recently did so another. This is all like big scale stuff, but another thing was the first electric truck tour that happened last summer.
Mm,
And it
mm,
was, I think it's Mercedes that have produced these Arctic trucks that have got a 500-mile range, and they used those trucks through KB event on a tour on the European tour. It was called the People Watching Tour.
mm.
Um, and that's brilliant because again, it's people taking a risk and breaking the mold of what's always been done. And at the moment, those tours are going to happen anyway. They're going to happen with big diesel trucks. So if you can replace them with an alternative that's not creating those emissions on the roads, then more power to them. So they've been doing
I mean, that's really good. So many artists leading the way, and like we say, the influence so much of culture. We'll go to a few questions shortly, folks. But
I just want,
there's
sorry,
yeah,
really
carry on.
sorry
And
to
any main challenges was one other question. Carry on, Claire.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a big up to some other amazing artists as well, kind of in a different scale or from a different group. And there's a couple of places where you can go and find them as well. So the organization Earth% has become like this great kind of beacon for so many amazing souls, like Sam Lee, Madam Gandhi is another amazing person, Cosmo. It's like all of these artists who are not only supporting they give like a percentage of their artist recording rights to Earth, and then that goes to positive projects for supporting the Earth and supporting Indigenous organizations and the kind of organizing of cleaning up the industry itself. Then there's the likes of David Gray, who spoke, and Anna Calvi, who spoke at our conference last week as well. They've
I
been
was
really
very impressed with them. Particularly, I didn't realise how deep on the environment David Gray was. It was
I know,
brilliant.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing. Like, who'd have thought? So yeah, so there's so many more artists speaking out because they can find each other. So it's not so threatening to speak out because when you do have a platform, you also get attacked very easily and called a hypocrite. And I think it's really important that people don't that they still do something and don't claim to be the perfect holier than thou or that they're completely infallible, but actually to highlight that there are still problems and there are still things that they can't overcome and that there isn't a solution to, but they're trying and they want to find the solution. That
Mm.
that's the way to approach it for everyone, not just major artists.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, really big up to all the artists who are pushing the envelope there, with the tours and everything. I think we had Massive Attack and one of the guys from Coldplay come when it was Occupy movement and came and did a big benefit concert
Nice.
and stuff. And, we need that kind of thing. So, well, last main question, we'll go over to folks asking questions. In a sec, if you've got ideas for questions, guys, there's a little heart-shaped comment down the button down the bottom of the screen, and you can you put your hand up for a question and things. There's a good one there coming up from Max in the chat. But what do you think are the main challenges before we go to questions, Claire, for for greening up things
I'd
and the
say
industry and?
The main challenge is it depends on which facet, but I'd say that competing for to become a priority is increasingly challenging. And one of the progresses that we saw was it went from awareness to kind of commonplace to everyone was well into it, like kind of the rise of Extinction Rebellion just before the pandemic. And then what's happened recently is there's been an active anti-net zero and anti-sustainability, anti-woke I don't know what you'd call it, stupidity. Let's call it
Pushback. Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So
Fossil fuel funded.
yeah, exactly. But luckily, I mean, for the most part, in the world that I work in, for the most part, the music industry, I mean, you wouldn't believe it, and certainly not all parts of it, but for the most part, it's quite progressive. And so that hasn't actually been such an obstacle. The geopolitical situation hasn't been such an obstacle yet. But agendas and priorities has definitely shifted. So there's a real strain on finances for anyone that's not kind of one of the th three majors in the industry. And so people are really restricted on their resources since the pandemic. And that makes it harder, not because sustainability is more expensive, because often it's cheaper, but it's the brain space and the people to help make those things happen and to make the changes is a big challenge. And then, of course, like you said, there's always a fossil fuel lobby, the meat lobby, who don't want to see this happen is a big challenge as well. But otherwise, as far as technology is concerned, as far as knowledge is concerned, that's really progressed leaps and bounds. And so it's just actually getting on with it is the big challenge in many cases.
Brilliant. We are up against a lot of big established interests from fossil fuels to various industries. So, yeah, but it's changing. It is massively changing, and that's fantastic. So, folks, if you've got a question, a comment, or feedback, there's a little heart button down the bottom to react, or you can put a hand up. Max, you got a good question there. Do you want to ask that? Over.
Thanks, Phoenix, and thank you, Claire, for a really inspiring talk so far. I was just interested to know if you've been in touch with any sports events, or any, leagues or anything that would be interested in trying to make themselves more green, more sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I saw that somebody had put in the comments that Forest Green Rovers obviously is really leading on that side of things. They've been vegan for 10 years now and 100% renewable energy, and they would never do it any other way. But then there's also Green Code was created, which is a certification that's initially been picked up by EFL, the English Football League. So they're working on programs together with the English Football League. And then actually somebody who I know who was part of Murmur, which is a recording industry kind of sustainability initiative, then went to work for, I might have this wrong, but I think it was for the Football Association. So that's kind of the Premier League and championships, and they're working on that larger scale as well. So there is stuff happening. There's some of them are really at the forefront of it. I think that they, like the artists, get flack for speaking out. The sports clubs do as well. They'll always have their fans saying, focus on winning for once and things like that instead of anything else. But their platforms, I would say, are almost possibly even more important than the music platforms because of the people that they reach, and it's families, and it's a lot of people that might really not be interested at all. And the case of Forest Green Rovers is really inspiring, and because they've managed to speak to people that might not be in the festival community bubble, who may also already be quite leaning towards that way of life anyway. And I love saying to festivals when they say, "Oh, it's too difficult to go vegan." I'm sorry, but a football club did it 10 years ago. So I think you can do it, you know.
Brilliant. Yeah, give it to them. Pioneering the ways.
Yeah, just to
David.
mention, there's an organization called Sport Positive run by Claire Poole, and that's kind of the like a real hub of sustainability for the sports sector as well. So it's definitely worth looking that up.
Can someone look that up and put it in the chat? We always save the chat after and network it out. Then we can find Sports Positive and put it in the chat. And just to say before coming over to Dave, there is part of this national emergency briefing. We're organising in 8 or 10 different sectors. Which is everything from churches to universities to councils, unions, farmers, but including sports venues. and unions will be showing this film and having a community assembly afterwards. So stadiums and sports venues go out to everyone, Joe and Jane public, and we really need to get it out in those sectors as well, beyond the usual alternative sector, shall we say. Over to David Leverton from MP Watch. Go for it, Dave. Over.
Really interesting, Claire. Thank you. I've been involved in lots of folk festivals over the decades, and one of my observations is that the food waste is a real issue. We encourage people to segregate the waste, and they don't. You end up with everything contaminated. And luckily, there are businesses that actually take whatever it is and will sort it. But it's not very efficient. It's not very good quality in that context. Any thoughts on how we can improve on that and how we can persuade people to do it better?
Yeah, so we've been battling that for across all types of events, and where we've made it work really well, they've been big events, and therefore they've needed a lot of resources. But I think it could be done on a smaller scale. One thing's for sure is that despite best intentions and the best audiences in the world, there will always be contamination. So there has to be some sorting process. We've found that the most successful for getting the biggest quantity of biodegradable waste is to have really clear signage, but also volunteers actually manning the bins and saying, use this one, use this one, use this one. So we often have the bin fairies, as we call them. We like to have lots of different types of fairies. We've got the grid fairies and we've got the bin fairies. And they make sure that people are using the right bins. And then we also have like amazing organizations like Green Box Events. A new group have recently really raised the bar, and they will do the sorting on site back of house as well, with a team of people. And then we had another process. So because we started to use, for places where we couldn't use reusables, we were using biodegradable serveware. But there's only a handful of places in the country that can process that. So most places, if you've got like oh, my tea went cold. It's all that talking. If you've got your compostable cup, that you get from any of your high street coffee retailers, then normally it ends up going to incinerator because it's contaminated, and you need to have it essentially needs to get heated up and treated the way that meat would be treated in order to biodegrade it. So it can't just go into any anaerobic digester, which is where most of the food gets taken. So we then have a partner with us. There's a company called MVAR, which is based in Cambridge, and I think Uxbridge, they've got a place as well. And we know that if we do events in London, we can give a mixture of compostable serveware and compostable cups and food, and we can send it to them and they can compost it. And we know that for sure, but they're really strict on contamination. So we have a separate skip that all of that goes into. This is quite technical, sorry, but lots of people are into food waste. So
This is the future. This is the future. We've got to get into it, you know.
So we have a separate skip that gets manned and checked, and then we have those processes beforehand. We have to be really strict with the traders and the caterers on what materials they have, so we can control how much things are getting contaminated and the chance for contamination. And then we make sure that it goes to the right place, and then we get the reports back that say, yes, it's not been contaminated. Because if it is contaminated, then it has to go into landfill or into incinerator, and you have to pay much more for it per ton. And that means that all of your food is then gone for energy, yes, but that's not really what I want it as. So,
Dave, does that help? Yeah,
That's really helpful, Claire. I think one of the challenges is that demands lots of manpower.
It does, yeah.
And it's really difficult if you're struggling to fill all the stewarding and everything else to say, right, we're actually going to put a load of effort into this as well.
Yeah.
If you outsource it, the quality ends up being really quite low, and you're paying for somebody else to do that work anyway.
Yeah, and this is something that we see that changes depending on the size of the festival as well, because we always, if we come into an event, then we'll make sure that at the contracting stage, so when you're giving someone the job, that part of the job requirement is X recycling rate, etc. Or if it's with
Mm.
the energy people, that they have to record how many kilowatt hours they're using and things like this. So it's trying to get into the beginning with what you're requesting, that that is a part of what you're requesting. And then I think the controls on what comes in is really helpful as well. Like Paradise City is a festival in Belgium that I went to assess it years ago. And I was like,
Mm.
I thought that it was really good and they've only got two bins. And then I realized, oh my God, that's because they've literally only got two waste streams. All that they had was cans and biodegradable, and everything else was reusable. And they didn't allow other materials into the site, so they didn't need other waste bins.
Huh.
And so then they got really high rates of return in that respect. So there's different touch points where you can do it. And I think also something that I haven't mentioned, which is super important, is working closely with the traders and the caterers to be like, because they really hate food waste. Like most, they don't like to see that. And reducing food waste in the first place, obviously, is the most important thing. But then working with them to say, how are we going to do this together? And especially with folk festivals where you probably have the same people coming year after year, then starting to nurture that process together and making sure that there's food salvage as well.
Mm. I
Food
think
salvage setups.
looking at all of this, this is part of the kind of circular economy of the future. And we're pumping out billions of tons of plastic still. There's things like hemp and biodegradable other other things, cornstarch. I think there's things that you can, the alternatives to the plastic that just biodegrade after 30, 60, or 90 days. And we've really got to look at the complete cycle of festivals, events, and scale it up into cities for this circular economy is really, really critical, because we're flooding the oceans, and we don't have to be. There are
Mm.
solutions. I do think David Somerville there in Edinburgh has got a question about grid fairies and scaling.
So I'm thinking of something at a completely different scale from the big
Hmm.
events. Community festivals are wanting to do the right thing. There's the North Edinburgh Community Festival, actually incredibly well attended by hundreds and hundreds of people, very mixed, very diverse from that part of town. That's on 16th of May this year. The organizer, or one of the organizers, was talking to me the other day and said, we'd love to get away from the diesel generators. So, Mike, and then I'm involved in Edinburgh Climate Festival on the Meadows. Again, probably 100 stalls, food stalls, but actually it open so that it's not like in a separate place that you can have these controls on.
Mm.
Um, does Grid Fairies scale down, and what are your plans for, or do you know of anybody else doing that sort of thing, so that we can offer alternatives to the diesel jennies?
Yeah, so their Grid Fairies battery, and thank you for the question, is massive. So that wouldn't make sense in a small event because it only, the size that I showed breaks down into two. So it's like, it's the equivalent of, for the power people, it's equivalent of two 500 kVA generators for capacity, essentially. So you'd probably be looking at more like 100, 200 kVA generators generally on smaller events. They do exist. There's a company called Greener Power who do a lot through the UK at the moment, focus more so on construction, but they were born out of the festival industry. Zenobi have smaller batteries is the name of another one, and then really small batteries that I absolutely love. Like you can carry them like a suitcase, and you don't need to be an electrician to use them. They are with Instagrid, and there's other people that have developed similar types as well, and they go as small as 2 kilowatts, which are really good for when you're building a site and have, you've only got a few little bits of electricity that are needed. And so you don't want to switch on a generator for that small amount of usage. Then these are really useful for that. Or if you've got something quite remote to avoid you having to put another generator in. The other thing is if these community events are happening on regularly used event sites, checking whether there is grid connection there and whether that grid connection can be put there, because the demand shouldn't be very high. But if it's a community event, it should be happening relatively regularly and year after year. So that's where we want to see the grid connections put in, so you don't need to depend upon hiring in batteries as well.
Does that help, David? I think it's really key. I think it's something that when we got Dale Vince up at Glastonbury to speak on Chris Toffee's stage, he talked about energy independence, and from a small scale, like we've seen at festivals with people with a truck and a few solar panels or a windmill for a caravan or whatever it is, up to the scaling up to an event or scaling up to a town, a parish, a city, an area being powered by renewables. It is possible. It's been possible for decades. We are funding the fossil fuel empire to the tune of billions every single week in tax breaks and all sorts. And if that was put into renewable energies, we could be energy independent within a few years. And it just really, strategically thinking, we're really not doing it right when we're relying on Russian oil and Middle Eastern oil when we could be energy independent. We've got to start shifting to that.
Well, hopefully that rooftop revolution will happen. That's been bandied around.
Well, one story there, the French government's actually made it by law, all new commercial buildings have to either have in their planning and that are being built new, either a solar roof or a roof garden. And roof gardens also absorb the rain when you get big heavy rains and flooding and that kind of thing. So we really need to push these solutions.
France have done quite a few good things in recent years. They also banned the flights if you could get to the same place within 4 hours by train as well. I thought that was brilliant. And more recently, didn't they? I don't know what you call it. They called for the arrest of Elon Musk because of his hideous deeds, whichever ones they were. But I quite like France's approach at the moment. Yeah. The details, I'm sure, are on Google. I don't recall them right now.
I think Abby had a good comment there about Butterfield. Abby, do you want to say about that? I thought that was a great example.
Hi, it's nice. I appreciate your talk, Claire. Many years ago, I knew about you, but at the time, I think, actually, I don't have a question. Thank you for engaging me. It's just nice to see you and hear you. But I don't think we couldn't afford something, or I remember
Butterfield did do an assessment one year because I came and did it, and it was amazing. Yeah, and I love Butterfield. I remember, I remember the ecstatic dance, and my friend had a trapeze set up in the back of her truck as well. And it was brilliant. It was a really sunny weekend as well, so we did come to Butterfield, and it's amazing.
Abby was saying something about the rotating the compost from Butterfield into community gardens. Was there something on that?
Yeah, I mean, this might be a little bit tricky to say, but it was compost toilets that everything went in to the IBCs, the food, I mean, they were really ahead of it, weren't they? Really, they were always off grid.
Yeah, Butterfield, yeah, early off grid festival.
Yeah, but they changed because the compost toilets were all on IBCs, and then but because it was a fixed site, which changes everything, doesn't it, if it's a site that you're repeatedly going back to. But they would do the compost turning, and then after 3 years I worked on a market garden, so it was pretty hideous, some of the things I did find, but after 3 years, and this is the whole thing about human manure, whether it's kind of safe, but we grew vegetables, and then it was beautiful, and the food was then grown to be cooked on site in the kitchens for the retreats that had an ongoing annual program.
That's a big solution.
And the cafe as well.
Perfect example.
Yeah, the Butterfield Cafe went to Glastonbury. It started there 20 years ago.
Yeah, wasn't it? A very long time. I mean, these are the solutions that we really need to look at, folks. I mean, not to get too deep into the shit, but like human manure handbook is possible out there. We can do some things off that. When they opened the Truro Climate Emergency Centre in an old fruit and veg shop, and the local mayor came down, and I got chatting to this farmer guy who was next to me, and a priest woman the priest woman said, "Oh, I'm the environmental priest for the Cornish parish," but the farmer was saying, I run my tractor and all the slurry and biogas that comes off it. So you can run your vehicles off this stuff. We need to think in circles and cycles and about solutions. Part of this is part of a grandchild of the Solution Zone TV project, and we like to talk about solutions. And everyone we went to at the 2000 and whatever it was, 9 Copenhagen Climate Summit, everyone had a solution. We just had 2 minutes on solutions, from Spanish MPs to Swedish activists to indigenous elders who were there. What do you think the solutions are? Everyone had a solution for a minute or two. And we really need to start creating the spaces, get the proper funding, the skills and the things together to promote these solutions. So back over to Claire, I think, really for parting words, summaries now. We're nearly
Yeah,
out.
I
But
did want to touch
thank
on
you so
Abby's
much.
point
Yeah, whatever you want to
because
share on for the tail end. Really
yeah,
appreciate you coming. It's been brilliant.
oh, it's such a pleasure, honestly. It's really great to connect with you all and have such a lovely chat. And the toilets is such an important one, and it's going to be even more important going forwards, and compost toilets and things like that, especially because it needs to be more normalized that we do that, and that there's such precious nutrients that at the moment we're making a problem for ourselves through eutrophication and through pollution of our rivers. Whereas actually, if we were using it properly and cycling it properly, then it could be restoring our soils. And not only that, but the water that it protects when we're getting more severe droughts and more extreme flooding. This is going to be such a precious resource, to the point that, are they going to allow festivals to use the water that's needed for the town that doesn't have enough water for itself anymore? And like I said before about that kind of circular learning, communicating, and delivering between events and cities, if we can show through events alternative ways of dealing with things like our sanitation and water systems, that's exactly the scale of things that need to then be changed on a city level, so that we can actually survive the changing tides, but also make things better and restore all of our soils, etc. And that goes across the board for all of the issues, but water and toilets, I think, are the most important.
Are you okay to run over a few minutes if I get a question there from Mary Ellen, Claire? Yeah.
Sure.
So we'll let you sum up just at the end in a sec. A final bringing the strands together. But over to Mary Ellen, one of my favourites, the Buddha of Deepak, Disabled People Against Cuts. Mary Ellen, have you got a question or a comment, my love? You all right?
I do. Thank you, Phoenix. And thank you, Claire. It's been really interesting listening in and inspiring to see that how much is happening, and how rapidly the change can happen if we get behind it. One of my favorite festivals is Small World Festival, and it's one of the first that was totally solar and wind powered, and now it doesn't have a wind power thing anymore. It's just solar powered, and they've recently just redone their toilets. They've always had compost toilets. They've just redone them, and they are beautiful. And so I recommend coming along. I run the Speakers Forum and Campaign Space there, and I would love to have you come and talk about this at Small World, and actually see what Small World is doing it's not a big festival, but it's been making big changes. And through the stewards and musicians and people who come to Small World, that change has been going out into the big world, and I love to see that change, and I'd love you to come along.
Oh, thank you so much. That sounds amazing. I know Small World as a venue from a lot of the festivals from back in the day. So that would be lovely. Thank you.
That would be a great one to link up. Small Worlds have been absolute pioneers of the solar festival and events for a long time. Old mate Pony and Emma and all the crew there, and they are festival stalwarts. They do the stage.
Yeah, Pony. I remember from those free parties I talked about, Pony was always there.
Very old school. Respect to the old school. Thank you so much, Claire, for coming. It's brilliant to hear the story. Actually, you talked about free parties and the festivals inspiring things early on, and how that has gone into mainstream culture. I heard on the radio a few years ago there's like 950 festivals across the UK now every summer. It's mainstream. So whatever we can do to green up festivals to influence mainstream culture. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, as my mate Jem from Regen says. Over to you for final parting comments. Anything you want to share? Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. We'll network this one out. It's great, incredible work you're doing. Keep at it. All power to you. Over.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I couldn't sum it up better than you did just now, but just to say again, not to underestimate the power of events to be able to make changes. But the events really need communities to be a part of that as well. And one thing that we didn't touch upon was the actual nature that's around us and the importance of an identity and a sense of place. And so if there's events happening in the places where the centres are as well, like being able to get people to actually connect to where they are, I think is going to help us to remember what we're a part of so that we can then start caring for it instead of destroying it. And that's the fundamental change that needs to happen.
That's what we need, folks. Fundamental change for a better sustainable future. All right, check out A Greener Future and the Green Events and Innovation Conference. Brilliant event last week. All right, Claire, big love. Thanks to everyone for coming, and see you next week. I think we've got coming up pretty soon, Hayley Fowler, who is a major professor of green transition and climate change, coming up on the next webinars. All right, big love. Keep networking.
Thank
Solutions wherever
you.
you are.
Take care.